Hello and welcome to this first lecture in this series on employment law, and this is very much an introductory lecture introducing you to this series on employment law. Before we get started, let me just introduce myself. I am Charlie and I'm a law LLB student at the University of Leicester. And so let's go on to what I intend to cover in this session. So by the end of this session, you should be able to outline the topics which we're going to be covering, which I intend to cover in this series, as well as describe the main skills which I hope you will develop in this topic as well. But first of all, some general information, especially if you are a law student doing employment law as one of your modules. This is very much a revision/consolidation lecture series, and this lecture series is by no means a replacement for your timetable teaching sessions. You must still go to those sessions, and you should only use my materials this series to help with consolidation and revision. Having said that though, if you do have any questions, please do put them in the comments section below, and I will try my best to respond to as many of them as possible. And also check your individual course details, because if you are a university student, employment law modules can change between different universities, and so I might be covering some stuff in this series which you don't have to know, which won't be on your module, and you might have things on your module which I won't be covering here, so please do check that. I find that listening to podcasts when walking, running, whatnot, or even watching these kind of videos can be a really good low stress way to revise and to actually have the knowledge going into my head whilst I'm doing something else. However, listening to this lecture alone will not benefit you if you want to be a high performance student. If you want to be a high performance student, you absolutely must engage in active revision, testing yourself and assessing yourself. So that could be past questions, exam style questions, or just do mock exams as well. It's really important you test yourself in order for you to be one of those top students. And on that note, a bit about assessments. There's lots of different possible assessment types. If you're studying this employment law as a module at university, you could have multiple choice questions. You might come across single best answer questions, although they are particularly popular for the professional law courses. So if you want to be a barrister or a solicitor, the courses you need to do to become those, they like single best answer questions. You might come across essays where you argue about what the law ought to be, or assess how good the law is, how effective the law is. There might also be problem questions where you're very much applying the law as it is, or there might even be case comments, which is a very unique assessment type, but I know that is an assessment type which some places do use. Or you might be asked to do a presentation, and there's many other different types of assessment which I haven't covered here. I obviously cannot cover all of these assessment types or provide support with all of these assessment types, but I do intend to produce some tutorial/seminar questions, exam style questions in due course, and I might even create some tutorial videos as well to go in this series to go through these questions which I plan to create. However, if this is something you are interested in, please do let me know, and then I can action that for you. So next, just a few of the key skills which I intend to help you develop throughout this lecture series on employment law. So firstly, critical analysis is a big one, questioning the law, evaluating the law, and that's a big part of doing a law degree. Although that's not 100% relevant in legal practice, it still does play a big part. But when it comes to a law degree, they're very much looking at the critical analysis. When you're doing a law degree, you're very much looking at the art of law in a way, rather than the practice of law. I think that's how McBride described it, or one such legal academic. We'll also be looking at problem solving and problem spotting, for instance through problem questions, which will also require an application of the law, which is probably a very important skill if you do intend to practice the law, especially the employment law. But we will also try and develop communication, both oral communication and written communication, as well as teamwork, because you might be doing assessments or work with your peers, or you might have a study group, or you might be in a legal advice clinic, for instance, where you specialise in employment law, as well as independence. Part of a university degree, a big part of a university degree, is the independent nature of study. And so throughout this module, this employment law series, you should be developing that independence to study. But let's now go into the topics which I intend to cover in this employment law series. So firstly, we will very much look at an introduction to employment law, where we will look at how employment law as an area of law has historically developed, as well as the sources and institutions of employment law. So that could include statutes, case law, employment tribunals, and all of that stuff, and how it's all come together to give us the employment law we know today. And then after this, we will go into the substantive employment law topic, a really nice classic area of employment law, where we'll look at different types of employment status. So for instance, what is the difference between an employee and a worker, and so on. So we'll look at all those different types of employment status and see what's different and what's similar between the different employment statuses. Before we go on to the terms and conditions of employment. So this is very much touching on contract law, which is one of the foundations of legal knowledge, but very much in the employment context. So we'll be looking at employment contracts and the standard terms and conditions you can expect in a contract of employment, and also some of the problems which might be around in employment contracts. For instance, the imbalance of bargaining power between the two parties. Then once we had a look at employment contracts, we would then go on to a more juicy area, although it's all very juicy in my opinion, but we will go on to topic 4, which will very much look at dismissal of employees and business reorganisation. And there we will be looking through a legal lens at redundancy and the process prescribed by law, transfer of undertakings, as well as employment dispute resolution. After that, we then go on to equality law, and that very much touches on Equality Act 2010 and the protected characteristics. And one of the areas which we will probably look at will be looking at maternity and paternity leave. So the women often get more time off to look after a baby than a male. And so we'll be looking at the law around that, as well as the law around equality more generally, and how far the law will go when it comes to equality in the workplace. After we have covered this, we will then go on to a similar kind of area in terms of the maternity paternity leave, and look at the reconciliation of work and family life. So that's really about finding the balance between work life and family life, and looking at what the law says around those areas. For instance, should you be getting work phone calls when you're at home outside of work hours, and what does the law actually say? Once we've covered that, we will then go back into the employment law proper, and we will look at freedom of association. And under the freedom of association, the trade unions is a very big part of that. So we'll be looking at what trade unions are and all the laws around trade unions, before then going on to collective bargaining, which trade unions have a big part about, and that's essentially looking at when employers are offered a new offer or something, to come together as a collective and bargain with the employer. But then collective bargaining might not always go to plan, as that's very much where the next topic 9 comes along, with industrial action. And we'll be looking at law around strikes and, well, the strikes and the law around lawful strikes. And of particular relevance for this area will be the Trade Union and Labour Relations Consolidation Act, which I call Talaka. So we'll be looking at that statute in particular in this topic. And then once we've finished with industrial action, we will then go on to worker participation. So workers participating in work disputes and in decision making involving and concerning those workers. Once we've done that, we will then take a different approach and we'll look at employment law on a wider scale, but looking at human rights and employment law. And so this will very much look at everything we would have covered in all the other topics, and in a way we'll bring it all together and look at it from a bigger picture. So that's all of the areas which I intend to cover in this employment law series, and so I'm hoping now you should be able to outline the different topics covered in this series, as well as describe the main skills which should be developed in this topic. Now, just to conclude, I hope you did like this video. Please do like it. If by liking the video it shows that there's a demand for these videos, you want these videos, as I will continue to produce this content. And likewise, please do comment. If you have any questions or feedback or anything at all, please do let me know in the comment section below, and I will do my best to respond to as many of the comments as possible. And also subscribe. By subscribing, not only are you showing me that there's a demand for this content and you want this content, but when I do upload more content, you will get notified of that content being uploaded. And finally, I'm doing this for the benefit of both myself and you by providing this free of charge. And so, if possible, please do support me, either in the descriptions or in the comment section below. I will post some links to some websites where you can financially support me. And although I will be going into more detail about why I'm asking for this support in later videos, essentially there's two parts of it. Firstly, I can then focus on my education further, so I can then continue to provide high quality public legal education, because I am a firm believer that the public should be educated on the law. I think that's very, very important. But then also, through your support, when I qualify as a barrister, I will then be able to engage in pro bono work, where essentially I'll be able to offer free legal advice and representation for free for those who might not otherwise be able to afford the legal representation. And so pro bono is something very close to my heart, and so by supporting me, that is something which I intend to be able to take further forwards. But that concludes this introductory lecture, and I very much look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.